Hello and welcome to the Tribal Drought Update for the Columbia and Upper Missouri River Basins webinar with NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. I'm Crystal Stiles, the Tribal Engagement Coordinator with the Cooperative Institute for Research and Environmental Sciences, or CERES, at the University of Colorado Boulder and NOAA NIDIS. Today's webinar will provide an update on drought conditions on tribal lands across the Columbia and Upper Missouri River Basin regions, and then a demonstration of the Upper Missouri River Basin Drought Indicators Dashboard, which has applicability to tribal nations throughout the Upper Missouri River Basin in the Pacific Northwest. Our speaker today will be Kyle Basinski from the Montana Climate Office at the University of Montana. And then I will lead a Q&A session with Kyle and wrap up the webinar. For those unfamiliar with NIDIS, this interagency program hosted by NOAA was created by Congress with a mandate to help the nation prepare for, mitigate, and respond to the effects of drought. NIDIS does this through a series of activities, including the coordination of regional drought early warning systems, also known as DEWs and shown on the map here, and delivering information on drought conditions and impacts. You will see that the circled area on the map is the region of focus today, which covers part of the Pacific Northwest DEWs and the Missouri River Basin DEWs. The drought information coordinator for both of these DEWs regions is Jason Gerlich, and his contact information will be dropped into the chat. NIDIS has been engaging with tribal nations since nearly the beginning of its inception, but more recently developed a tribal drought engagement strategy to ensure that tribal perspectives are incorporated into NIDIS's work and that tribal nations are equal partners in responding to drought. And we accomplish this through our guiding principles of engagement: respecting tribal sovereignty, ensuring trust and reciprocity, and ensuring that our drought early warning systems are appropriate and useful to tribal nations. NIDIS has funded dozens of applied research projects through our Coping with Drought research competition. In fiscal years 2022 and 2024, we held competitions that focused on supporting tribal drought resilience. One of the first projects from the FY 2022 cohort to wrap up is a joint project between the Montana Climate Office and the University of Montana and the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Reservation, Salish Kootenai College, and the Wilderness Society. Kyle will talk a little more about it during his presentation, but enhancements to the dashboard he will be demonstrating were in part funded by this project. Okay, let's get started with the presentation. If you have questions for Kyle, please enter them anytime using the question box in the GoToWebinar toolbar. A recording and recap of this webinar will be posted on drought.gov. Now I will turn it over to Kyle.
Hi, thank you, Crystal. And thank you all for having me here. Thanks to NIDIS and the Tribal Drought Program for hosting this webinar. It's a real honor to be able to speak to everybody in the drought world. Today, as Crystal talked about, I'm going to be discussing a tribal drought update and some resources that have been funded through two projects: the Native Drought Resilience Project, which Crystal spoke about briefly. I'll introduce that in a second. And then the Native Resilience Project, which is a West-wide partnership between the federally recognized tribes extension program, the Desert Research Institute, and tribes all across the West. And I'm going to be focusing my discussion today on the Columbia and Upper Missouri River Basins, but I'll try and bring in some insights from across the rest of the nation as well. I'm Kyle Basinski. I'm the Director of Climate Extension for the Montana Climate Office. We are based out of, the University of Montana, and we serve as Montana's official climate stewards, climate data stewards. We've been in existence since 2013. We're a state designated body, and our mission is to provide high quality, timely, relevant, and scientifically based climate information and services to all Montanans. One of the key roles and responsibilities of the Montana Climate Office is to operate the Montana Mesonet, which is an extensive and growing network of weather, soil moisture, and snowpack monitoring stations. You can get to our website and all of the resources that I'm going to be sharing with you today by scanning this QR code. I'm sorry, I'm totally into QR codes. Get your phones out. There'll be a couple more during this presentation, or going to that link right there, climate.umt.edu.
Kyle.
Hey, Kyle.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Eleanor.
I think we're going to say the same thing, but Kyle, we're not seeing your presentation at the moment.
Oh, no. Well, thank you for telling me. Oh, it says can't share your screen. Got it. Well, we practiced this earlier. I don't know what's going on. Can you invite me to share it again, Eleanor?
Yes, I'm going to
Maybe?
switch it to Crystal really fast, just so I can
Okay.
switch it back to you.
Sounds good.
Hold tight.
Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, I see the request. Do you see it now?
Yes, it's just
Yes,
not
and
in
let me get
slideshow
into the
mode.
presentation mode. Yep, there we go. How about that?
There we go. Okay, perfect. Good to
Perfect.
go.
Okay, sorry everyone. Well, there were some pretty pictures, but it's okay. Here's that QR code that I was talking about, and there's our website address, climate.umt.edu. Today, I want to go through sort of three phases of this project. First, I want to talk about resilience and the program that Crystal introduced, the Native Drought Resilience Program, and generally the larger umbrella of native resilience projects that we've got going on in Montana and across the West. Then I'm going to give a brief overview of the current conditions and drought outlook for the country. I'm going to say brief because, in fact, the DEWS, the Drought Early Warning System, has a series of webinars that you all can tune into to get a more in-depth monthly updates of drought conditions across the country. So definitely tune into those by going to drought.gov. And then I'll give an overview and a little live demo of the Upper Missouri River Basin Drought Indicators Dashboard, which was developed here at the University of Montana. The Native Resilience Project started in 2021, and it is a collaboration with the USDA Climate Hubs funded through USDA NIFA. The goal of the project is to strengthen the role of the USDA Climate Hubs across Indian country. Initially, it started in partnership with the Northern Plains Hub and the Southwest Hub, but we've started bringing more and more of the hubs in to this collaborative project, and it really has three components to it. The first is to focus on agriculture, showcase tribal food sovereignty initiatives, agroecosystem restoration, drought-resistant cropping practices, and other native agricultural resilience successes across the West. The second is to build infrastructure supporting climate data and drought data for tribes across the West. This includes building approaches that join indigenous and tribal ecological knowledge with Western data and models of environmental risks and impacts, and strengthening tribal data sovereignty by bringing data back into tribal control and tribal governance. And then finally, to develop educational resources. Through a series of projects, we've learned in the Native Resilience Project that it really is reaching the next generation that's going to build resilience, climate resilience, and drought resilience across Indian country, and quite frankly, across our globe. And so we're partnering with the Desert Research Institute in order to advance the ways that educators conduct place-based learning to support resilience at the local and regional levels in Indian country on tribal lands. You can get to many of the resources that I'm sharing today, which were developed using some of the support from the Native Resilience Project at native-resilience.com. There's so much to talk about with this project, and I can't share all of it today. So please go to this website. One thing that you'll find there is stories of climate impacts and climate resilience across Indian country that are really inspiring and can serve communities across the West. The other project, and the one that was funded under NIDIS, a NIDIS Coping with Drought grant starting in 2022, is the Native Drought Resilience Project, subtitled CSKT, Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Actions for Climate Drought Adaptation. This was, as I said, funded through NOAA NIDIS, and as Crystal mentioned, is a partnership between the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes, the University of Montana, and then also the Wilderness Society and Salish Kootenai College, the tribal college, or the tribal university, I'm sorry, right there on the CSKT, the Flathead Reservation. One of the things that I love about the 2022 program, Coping with Drought program, was that it really focused on tribal drought adaptation plans, and said, there's been a lot of resources funneled into the development of drought and climate adaptation plans across Indian country and across all of our communities in the West and across the United States. But oftentimes the gap is not the creation of those plans, but their implementation. It's funding to support the implementation of those plans. And so the 2022 Coping with Drought program was really strategic. It said, if you got a plan, we really want to support adaptation actions that are designated in those plans. And so it ends up that the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, the Flathead Reservation, was one of the first tribal communities across the West to develop a climate change strategic plan that really incorporated drought and drought resilience into that plan. The Flathead Reservation has both agriculture, farming, and agroforestry covering the reservation, and so drought is really felt in communities, not only from an agricultural perspective, but also from air quality, human health, you name it. And so, this project identified 5 different actions that the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes wanted to take in order to advance the goals of their climate change strategic plan. Those included training the next generation of environmental leaders, developing climate drought internships, both hosted at Salish Kootenai College, a real source of resilience for the Flathead Reservation, and within Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribal government. Developing climate drought data training materials, which we'll see some of those today, including videos for our drought dashboard. Developing a specific portal into drought assessment in Montana that's focused on the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes and the Flathead Reservation. Deploying and supporting weather, drought, and air quality monitoring networks. This project installed a brand new climate grade, research grades, weather station at the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Bison Range, as well as a network of low cost but high quality air quality monitors, both indoor and outdoor, across the reservation to improve community resilience and health. And then finally, it's a communication program to develop story maps, Esri story maps, which are these engaging web-first geospatial websites that allow you to explore the content in the climate change strategic plan in an interactive way and bring new information. It turns it into a living document. You get to bring new information into that document over the years. The work that I'm going to share today has been funded in part by this grant, Native Drought Resilience, specifically the implementation of the Climate Drought Dashboard and the development of the training materials. You can get to these resources and many more that are focused on the climate change strategic plan from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes at this QR code in this address, cskt.org/climate. That'll bring you to the Climate and Environment Program at the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, where you can learn more. All right, let's get into some of our current conditions in drought. And I know that I'm talking to people here who are probably very familiar with the US Drought Monitor, but I just wanted to share a little bit about the Drought Monitor and how it's put together as a way of framing the rest of our discussion. The US Drought Monitor is a product that has been going on for over 25 years. It started on January 4th, 2000, and every single week, organized out of the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska, a set of authors come together, look at all of the data from across the country, and assess where we are seeing drought conditions across 5 different categories: abnormally dry, so not official drought; moderate, severe, extreme, and exceptional drought conditions. This comes straight from the NDMC's website, and I think it's really important. It's been updated weekly since January 4th, 2000. I haven't been able to find a time when they've missed. It's a pretty remarkable product for its continuity. It's made with more than just precipitation data. The authors bring in both expert knowledge from across the country, soil moisture data, temperature, precipitation, and vegetation data, you name it, in order to make a real-time, precise, best assessment that they can of where drought conditions are. And when I say that a person does this, it's a group of people, and it is a real person every week using real data that makes the US Drought Monitor. This isn't created by a computer. The US Drought Monitor is a current snapshot. It's not a forecast of conditions into the future. And the public are invited to be a part of the drought monitoring process through impact reporting. This is a very open process. You can go to droughtmonitor.unl.edu in order to get to the US Drought Monitor's website, or drought.gov to access all of these data. Multiple states and regions contribute to the USDM weekly, and that's key. Montana has been part of this process for over a decade now. And in 2017, it was realized that we needed to step up our game and start being more consistent about the data that we were using in order to inform the US Drought Monitor in Nebraska about what conditions were like in the state of Montana. So that gave rise to the Drought Indicators Dashboard that I'll share in the third part of this presentation. But here we are. You saw going on in the background sort of the rundown of drought conditions over the last 25 to 26 years. Here we are today, where in the Southwest we're experiencing extreme and exceptional drought, especially across southern Arizona, southern California, southern Nevada, and down in South Texas. Gets a little better as we go north, but we're still seeing severe drought conditions in the high country up here in Montana and the Northern Rockies, and severe to extreme drought conditions across the Northern Great Plains. I like to think of what happens if you take all of those images that were just flashing in the background and smush them down into one history. This is if you were to take each of those layers and average them and ask how often is every area across the country in one of those drought classes. This is what that map would look like as of this week. The darkest areas here have actually been considered to be in drought conditions, so either abnormally dry or worse, for over 90% of the weeks between January 4th, 2000 to today. That's a pretty intense run. Over 90% of the weeks there around the Navajo Nation, the Hopi Reservation there in northeastern Arizona. Other areas of the country, you can see that the West has been, quite frankly, a hotspot for drought across the last 26 years, as has Hawaii, especially the Big Island of Hawaii, where we had those major fires last year. If we look at the stats on this, what we see is that across the OCONUS, that's the contiguous U.S. and the outlying territories, we see an average of about 47% of weeks, almost half the time, the nation is in one of these drought classes on average across the nation. So that's about half the time. Tribal land, though, which is really aggregated more in the western U.S., has seen a higher percentage. About 60% of the time on average, tribal nations have been in either abnormally dry or worse conditions. If we just look at severe, extreme, and exceptional drought conditions, we see much the same pattern. The Western U.S. has seen really extreme drought, in fact, a mega drought. If we're looking over the last couple of thousand years, over this 26-year period, with certain areas of the Western U.S., including northwestern Nevada, being up in the 40, 50, 60% range of years where they've been in severe or worse drought conditions. Again, running those statistics, the average across the country is 17%. Tribal land, it's about a quarter of the time. So what we're seeing here is that tribes have been impacted by these abnormally dry conditions more than the rest of the country. It matters in Indian country how we're defining drought. Let's break this down a little bit. I'm going to show you some graphs now through time, and I'm going to show you them over these areas. These are hydrologic regions, so it doesn't adhere strictly with the drought early warning system areas, but we've got the Missouri and the Pacific Northwest. You'll see those at the top of your graph, and then we'll see the rest of the Western U.S. across the first 5 graphs. This is what that looks like over that same almost 26-year period from January 4th, 2000, weekly through this last week. And what we see is we've seen across the Western U.S., those are these 5 graphs up here, periodic, very large droughts, including the one that we experienced. This is just zooming into the last 6 years. The one that we experienced up here in the Missouri and the Pacific Northwest from mid-2020 through the beginning of 2023. And really into 2023 across this region and really across the entire Western U.S., a big droughty period that we all remember. What we've seen, though, over the last, we saw a little bit of a lull, unless you were in the Southern Plains, during 2023 into 2024. But as we've come out of La Nina conditions, we've seen a reemergence of very dry conditions across the Southern Plains, the Colorado River Basin, and we're seeing some of that emerge further west and north in the California Great Basin, the Missouri, and the Pacific Northwest. So this is where we're at. Let's talk briefly about why this matters, and then we'll go into a little bit of future conditions. So first, why it matters. Well, most of you probably know this, but the US Drought Monitor is a key regulatory tool used by the federal government. It wasn't designed to be that, but over time it has become more and more useful. It's proven its worth in terms of declaring drought disaster designations across the country. This is the latest data from the USDA Secretary of Agriculture, and the disaster designations for drought. These are nearly automatically triggered by conditions as documented by the U.S. Drought Monitor, both where we've seen drought affecting counties themselves directly. So that's D2, that severe drought level for more than 8 weeks, or D3 or D4 will get these primary counties. That's where we've seen those conditions. And then contiguous counties are counties that are adjacent to counties that have been declared primary counties in drought. This gets updated periodically by the Secretary of Agriculture's office. This update is as of April 22nd, so it's a little bit out of date. The tempo has been a little slower over the last month and a half, but I anticipate that we'll get an update to those secretarial disaster designations shortly. Let's look at a little bit into conditions going over the summer, the rest of the season, and then we'll move to the drought dashboard to dive in a little more about how you can participate in this process, especially if you're in the Pacific Northwest or Upper Missouri River Basins. These data are from NOAA. They're from the Climate Prediction Center, and they're effective as of this week. So these are the 6 to 10 day temperature and precipitation outlooks. We continue to see above normal temperatures across the western U.S., especially across the Four Corners states into the high plains. That combined with below normal, the likelihood of below normal precipitation means an increase in aridity across this region. Across the northern tier, up where I am, we're really hoping that this materializes where we get some above normal precipitation going into the next 6 to 10 days. Across the eastern U.S., we expect wetter than normal conditions, but also warmer than normal, save for the New England states. The 2-week outlook, 8 to 14 days, shows much of the same, warm across the southern tier of the country, and wet across the eastern and northern tier of the country. Hopefully some of that high pressure that's causing really dry conditions across the Four Corners moves out. Maybe we'll get a little precipitation there. And then I failed to mention Alaska, Hawaii. We anticipate above normal precipitation, especially on the North Slope. Weeks 3 to 4, so this is looking through the end of June. What the Climate Prediction Center is seeing is above normal temperatures across most of the country, including a really hot dome and dry dome moving across the central and northern Rockies into the northern plains. This is going to be a critical period. If this materializes the way that the Climate Prediction Center is expecting, we expect to see an expansion of droughty conditions across our region. And then the seasonal outlook for temperature and precipitation, this is going through June, July, August, gets more speculative the further out you go, and yet the story is much the same as I was talking about. It's going to be a hot summer, warmer than normal temperatures across all of the contiguous U.S., across much of Alaska, and then drier than normal conditions or below normal precipitation across the northern tier, the Pacific Northwest, northern Rockies, northern Great Plains, perhaps extending down into the central and southern plains. We can hope that this materializes down here above normal precipitation across the East Coast. So if you take these CPC outlooks, one of the products that gets created every week with the US Drought Monitor is a US drought outlook. This is the best, our best estimate of where we expect the development of additional droughty conditions. These are D1 or above. That's in yellow there. The persistence of current droughty conditions. Those are the brown areas. The removal, so improvement of drought, and removal of drought conditions it's very hard to see on this map, in gray and green. What we see through the end of June 2025 is primarily across the West, a development or an expansion of drought conditions across the West, given those conditions that we were just looking at, the CPC outlooks going out 1 and 3 months. If we look at it through the end of the summer, the story remains much the same. This is through August 31st. It doesn't look too much different, except for except for that that July and August that we were looking at, where we're expecting to see those abnormally high temperatures and drier conditions going across into the northern Great Plains. That's where when we expect to see development of droughty conditions in the northern Great Plains. Like I said, these resources, I'm just giving a brief overview. The drought.gov is your best resource for not only getting at local distillations of the US Drought Monitor. Your own drought history for your state or county is available on there, but also getting at data like these, the drought outlooks going into the future. It's a really great resource, and I direct you to that and to drought.gov's NIDIS's other webinars for getting a more intensive look at drought conditions in your region. Right now, though, I want to pivot to the tool that was developed first for Montana, then for the Upper Missouri River Basin. It extended out into the Pacific Northwest, and has recently been refined to be more useful for tribes across the Northern Plains, Missouri River Basin, and Pacific Northwest. The Drought Monitoring and Indicators Dashboard was, as I said, first developed as part of the Upper Missouri River Basin Drought Early Warning System. The goal of this dashboard initially was to bring together all of the data that were being used on a weekly basis by the Montana Drought and Water Supply Subcommittee of the Governor's Drought and Water Supply Committee. So this is the group that every week, just like the US Drought Monitor, is assessing conditions just in the state of Montana. And prior to about 2017, the way that this worked on a weekly basis is people were coming together. They all had data sets that they were looking at. They'd been out on the landscape observing the development of drought, the more wet conditions in other places, and they would all come together, discuss the data that they were bringing to the table, and then make a decision about how to recommend drought assessment to the US Drought Monitor in Nebraska. One of the challenges about that was those data changed regularly. Some of the data was pretty sophisticated that people were bringing to the table. Others were not. They were different in terms of their periods of reference. Some people were using data sets that were looking way back into the past and saying, you know, is it drier right now than the last 100 years? Whereas some other data sets had much shorter periods of record, where people were saying, well, is it drier right now than the last 15 years? That's all the data I have. And so, through funding from NIDIS and NOAA, the Montana Climate Office partnered with the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, the Montana State Library, and many other partners to develop a unified framework for drought assessment, first across Montana, then the Upper Missouri River Basin, and now across both the Pacific Northwest and the UMRB. This brings operational drought models to all of the committees that are making these recommendations to the US Drought Monitor. It's interactive. These data are updated in daily to weekly time steps. They're available at very fine spatial resolutions, 30 meter to a kilometer resolution. Most of them are gridded data sets. And then we've performed local validation of many of these data sets using the Montana Mesonet, which until recently wasn't part of national and global weather station networks, and therefore could be used for validation. It was actually pretty convenient. And then recently, we've updated this dashboard to allow you to zoom in very quickly on any area of interest. And this URL down here gets you to one of those examples for the Flathead Reservation. Here's that as a QR code. And if any of you are following on a computer, and I know some of you are, you might be eating lunch, you might be driving. Don't try and do this if you're driving, but if you're following on a computer, go ahead and click through with me at this link. I think it'll get dropped in the chat. And we're going to jump off into an interactive demonstration. And I'd love for you to follow along with me and be thinking about any questions that you might have. All right, I'm going to switch over to the drought dashboard. Here we are. Is everybody seeing that? Can I get a verbal confirmation from my co-hosts?
Yes, looks great.
Great, super. Okay. So if you click the link that I actually gave you here, it's going to bring you. Oop, I jumped forward. It's going to bring you to straight into the Flathead Reservation, which is great. And you can get at that by just adding a question mark, name equals Flathead, or any area that you're interested in. That brings us straight into the Flathead Reservation, and we can navigate around there and see those local conditions. This is why it's really useful for local communities. If you've got a county name you want to look at, you can also do that. You can pop a county name in there. It uses what's called a fuzzy search algorithm, so your spelling doesn't have to be right, and you don't have to type the name exactly. It's actually pretty cool. But I'm going to go back out to see the whole dashboard. What we can see here is that we've got both the Upper Missouri River Basin going down into North, South, and South Dakota and Nebraska, and the Columbia River Basin over here, extending into Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. Many of these states use this dashboard as well for their weekly drought assessments. My experience, obviously, is with the Montana process. And what this dashboard presents is data that's unified on a weekly basis. I'm going to go through some of the features of it first. We'll get into some of the data sets, and then I'll take your questions for about the last 15 minutes of our session today. First off, when you get to this website, there's a couple of places you can get to right away. You can get to current weather data and a data downloader for the Montana Mesonet. That's not going to be as important to everybody in this, but I wanted to point it out for those Montanans in here. If you are in Montana, we host our own drought impacts reporter where you can make a report about current conditions where you live, and that's really helpful for our drought assessment team in the state of Montana. You can click Make a Report, which will bring you to an interactive form where you can report on conditions for your local area, and then you can click See Current Reports in order to see a map of the reports over the last 90 days. Finally, you can get to information about the Montana Climate Office. This just brings you back to our website. One of the things that we're really proud of in the Montana Climate Office is that all of the work that we do is fully reproducible. This is a link for those of you who are more technically inclined and would like to see the code that produces this entire dashboard. Every data set in here is produced nightly, stored on a server. All those data are publicly available, and the code that produces them are publicly available, as is the code for the dashboard itself. Our goal with this was that this dashboard and this infrastructure actually be used in other regions in order to host their own dashboards. For any of the data sets that I'm going to share with you, and these are all different indicators of drought, you can click this little eye up here in the right-hand corner, which will tell you just a little bit about that particular indicator. For example, the standardized precipitation index, which is what we're looking at here, is a drought index that is just looking at precipitation over a time period from 15 days to 2 years, and asking, has the precipitation over the last 15 days been more or less than the precipitation over a reference period? And in this case, we're using a 30-year reference period from 1995 through 2024. So this map is showing us right now whether our precipitation over the last 30 days was more or less, red being less, blue being more, than our last 30 years. And we've colored them using a color scale that may be familiar to many of you. This is using the US Drought Monitor color scale, where it goes from yellow into a deep maroon, representing droughty conditions, and then the opposite side of that, a light blue to a dark blue, representing pluvial conditions, wetter conditions. You can also look at different time scales. So if you're interested in just the last 2 weeks, it's been a really dry 2 weeks. We've had a high pressure dome over much of the Columbia River Basin in northern Rockies. It is exceptionally dry compared to the same period of time over the last 30 years, the end of May, beginning of June. If we look further back in time, 45 days, 60 days, so this is 2 months, the last 2 months, compared to that same period of the last 2 months over the last 30 years, what we see is that the Blue Mountains and the Cascades have been exceptionally dry, going up into the northern Rockies and pouring over the Front Range up near the Blackfeet Reservation. Continuing on to 90-day, 120-day, and we can even look at the last water year. So this is looking at October of last year through today to get us a sense of how we're doing as a water year. So sort of on average, the time when snow starts accumulating in our mountains through today. And what we see is really this high plains region of Montana is much drier than normal. Now that's the standardized precipitation index. Let's look at some of the other indices. And remember, you can click the eye up in the right-hand corner to learn a little bit more about what those are, including some relevant citations and what period of reference we're using in order to estimate each of these indices. SPEI is one that I actually really like to use. This is incorporates both precipitation and temperature to as a standardized measure of evapotranspiration, or the amount of water that is coming off of the landscape through evaporation, direct evaporation of water, and transpiration from plants. So plants undergoing photosynthesis, releasing water into the atmosphere. And what we see if we look over those same time scales is much the same picture, but it's attenuated by that temperature. Hotter times, usually until stomata shut down, usually indicate faster evaporation rates across this region. And so what we see is, especially over the last 2 months, we see that same pattern where the central Idaho, the Blue Mountains up into the northern Rockies, and then the Cascades have been extremely to exceptionally dry. Other drought indices that are here include the Evaporative Demand Drought Index, which measures much the same thing as the Standardized Precipitation Evapotranspiration Index, with some slight differences. We have soil moisture, again on the same color scale, but in this time we've got 2 different models. We have SPORT, which is a NASA product that is a derived soil moisture product from satellite data and other data sources. This is really showing that our soil moisture for up on the Blackfeet Nation and across the northern Great Plains and Montana are extremely dry right now. And we've also have a different soil moisture model, which isn't performing very well right now, and that's why it jumped back to June 3rd. But it's showing much the same thing, uses a slightly different process, and so you get slightly different metrics. Also, that it's back in June 3rd, where it's called TopoFire. It's another model of soil moisture. I really like looking at soil moisture when I'm assessing agricultural impacts of drought. Where really it's that moisture that's in the soil that's available for plants or not, that's going to really create those impacts that we see from drought conditions. One of the newest additions to this, and something that I'm really excited about specifically for the Flathead Reservation, is a model of stream flow percentiles. This is actually an artificial intelligence. It's a machine learning based model that uses the entire USGS streamflow gauge network and its history, as well as the hydrologic boundaries, and that's what you're seeing here for the United States, in order to model current conditions of ungauged basins. So not all of these basins have a stream gauge. In fact, if we go over to station data here, we can click down and see all of the USGS stream flow gauges. Not every one of these basins, of these watersheds, excuse me, has a gauge in it. But we use the ones that do and that exist in the headwaters. That's key in order to create estimates for the ones that don't. This work, you can find out more about it here, and it's a very sophisticated model. But I think those of you who are interested in it would really love learning more about this amazing work by my colleague Zach Hoylman. This really will show you this amount of water that's coming down out of the mountains right now into our major rivers. And I point at these three areas here because these are the headwaters of the Flathead River that drain into Flathead Lake, and then that feed both the SKQ Dam that's on the Flathead Reservation and the lower Flathead River, which eventually meets up with the Columbia. And it's really important for agriculture and water availability on the Flathead Reservation. So being able to see that the middle fork of the Flathead River is currently experiencing stream flow in the 0th percentile, pretty much meaning it's the driest, it's the lowest stream flow for this time of year that we've ever seen. And then 3rd percentile for the middle fork, 28th percentile, still in the lowest third of years that we've ever seen for these different headwaters of the Flathead River that flow down onto the Flathead Reservation. Really important. We can look at the current conditions and also going back in time, 7-day aggregates, 14 and 28-day aggregates across those USGS stream gauges. Other data that are available include standard meteorological data, just precipitation percentiles, the precipitation percent of normal, which is slightly different. Your percentiles, right, are going to be relative to, again, a period of record. This is another 30-year period of record, and showing you that these areas are seeing between the 0th and 2nd percentile. So the top 2% driest period over the last 30 days that we've seen over the last 30 years. That's remarkably dry in terms of our precipitation record. That will really closely track the SPI, Standardized Precipitation Index. If we look at percent of normal, we see the color scale changed here. Percent of normal, it can be in the 50 to 70% of normal. So you could be receiving just half the precipitation and still be in the 0th percentile, be the driest on record. So it's really important to think in terms of percentiles. How odd is the amount of precipitation that we're having right now? And I'm here to tell you that across the Flathead Reservation and actually across the Northern Rockies, and then I'll zoom back out for the benefit of everybody else in this room, across the Blue Mountains, the Washington Cascades, we're seeing conditions that are among the driest conditions in terms of precipitation that we've seen over the last 30 years. We can look at the same thing in terms of temperature, and again, going through time. So we can see that it's been hotter over the last 60 days than over the last 30 years across much of Oregon, and it's been warmer in general across this whole region, save for some areas in Wyoming and then up in the southern Oregon Cascades. Finally, in the last couple of things I want to show you, this isn't as important right now. We're sort of coming out of our snow period here, but we do have both the SNOTEL data, which you're probably familiar with. These are These are the standard snow data from snow telemetry network stations, which are usually in high elevation alpine settings, and they're really looking at how our snowpack is looking compared to, again, historical conditions. Each has its own reference period. This particular station in Clover Meadow, in southwestern Montana, is actually looking at 1978 to 2024. But we also calculate basin-wide snow water equivalent values using a different data set, the Snow Data Assimilation System out of NOAA. And what this tells us is if we were to look at snow across an entire watershed, how that snow is distributed. So, for example, here in the South Fork of the Flathead, we see that it's low across the entire for this time of year across the entire watershed, and it's pretty consistently low. We're seeing about half of the amount of snow as we're used to for this time of year. If we look into some other areas, we might see a different story. This is obviously more important, something that we were really paying attention to as we went through February, March, April, and into May. But what we've seen across the West, and especially across, actually across the whole West, is a very, very fast snow melt this year. We're seeing drier conditions right now in terms of our snowpack than we normally do for this time of year. And that is not good for our late season flows, especially for irrigators. Finally, we've got a couple of NDMC and NOAA's drought indices. One that we have is the Vegetation Health Index. This is from NOAA. This is looking at how our vegetation are responding to current conditions on the ground and their growth. And so what we're seeing is across the high plains, across northern Montana for this time of year, we're seeing less growth of our vegetation, less vegetation response than in previous years. Let's look at whether we've got no, we don't have a period of record listed there. And then the Forest Drought Response Index is actually a product out of the National Drought Mitigation System, or Mitigation Center, excuse me. This is a product that is that was developed primarily for the eastern United States. And yet, as we were working with our partners on the Flathead Reservation, much of the Flathead Reservation is forested land. And so what our partners wanted to do at CSKT were to understand what this index indicates on the Flathead Reservation. Right now, what we're seeing is that it's indicating, especially across the Mission Mountains, better than normal conditions for our forests, about normal across the Jocko. This is in the southwestern corner of the Flathead Reservation. But what we see across other portions of the Northern Rockies is drier or harder drought conditions for our forests. This will be something that we really pay attention to as we're going into the rest of this season, where we know we've got lower snowpack right now than we have historically. We know we've seen less precipitation than normal than we have historically. And so I anticipate if the Forest Drought Response Index is appropriately capturing the conditions in our western forests, remember it was created for eastern forests. If it's capturing our conditions in western forests, we expect these conditions to deteriorate pretty quickly. All right, I'm going to pop back into my presentation for one more slide. Again, if you want to get to this, it's at drought.climate.umt.edu. It is updated every night, and if you start using it operationally for your home community, please let us know. Send us a note. We'd love to hear both about how you're using it and whether there are any improvements to it or changes that you would like to see. Finally, and recently, and through funding from NIDIS, we've developed a series of tutorial videos. My colleagues, Christine and Brett, put these together. They're fantastic, fantastic introductions to some of the different tools that I just shared with you on this drought dashboard. There's a good introduction to why this was created and then how to access it, some about the drought metrics, and then it goes a little bit more in depth into drought impact reporting and how to make one of those reports to report conditions in your own community. Ooh. You can get to those tutorials on the Montana Climate Office website. You can also click this QR code. It'll show up in the chat. You're welcome to watch those videos. Let us know if you see anything in there that you'd like changed, or if you can think of something else that's been confusing to you about the drought dashboard. We would love to create a video to help support you. So with that, we've got about 5 more minutes for any questions from all y'all. And my email's here if you want to email me with any questions as well. I think I'm going to get some help from Crystal for questions. Do you see anything out there, Crystal?
Yes, thank you, Kyle. Real quickly, just a reminder to please enter questions using the question box in the GoToWebinar toolbar. So just a couple of things so far. Kate Ely, whom you know from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, she had a quick comment that this website is wonderful and informative, and thanks you for sharing it. And then we have actually a question from Kate, but also another one from Kayla from the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, and both questions are about drought impacts. So I'll ask Kayla's question first. And her question is just curious, how far back do the drought impact reports go? Also, any recommendations for downloading data from this dashboard to be used for tribal drought planning?
Those are 2 great questions. And I'm sorry I don't have a slide for this, but I can show you how to get to the data. First of all, if you're so inclined, you can click this base data set for any of these indicators and get to the OG data that we're pulling from. So that's really useful if you want to go to those to the raw data sources. If you want to see the precise data that we are displaying here, those are available too. They're a little harder to get to, and I'll talk with Zach about getting these data a little more present, but you can get to them at data.climate.umt.edu. Now, these data are going to be pretty focused on for people who are GIS specialists, right? So they might not be the most useful for everyone, but for example, our SPI, all of those data that are displayed, you can see that they were written last night at 10:52 or at 10:54 a.m. So I'm sorry this morning, but this is in Greenwich Mean Time, so it was at 6 this morning or earlier at 4 this morning. That we can get each of these geotiffs that are those grids of the data. They're all available at data.climate.umt.edu/drought indicators. So if you get to that, then you can get to these gridded data sets. We actually serve the website that you saw straight from this server. So you're welcome to start hitting this and creating your own maps if you'd like. We'll let you know if it seems like it's impacting our servers too much, but I sort of doubt it. So that's the answer to one of the questions. The other question was about our drought impacts reporter. Let's look at, oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. Let's look at our current reports and see. This was all developed in ArcGIS Online by one of my predecessors, Mike Sweet and others, and it has reports. It looks like our reports are only going back to October 1st, 2024, so the last water year. But we've got a historical data set as well, going back to July 2017. So this is a Montana-based product. The US Drought Monitor and the National Drought Mitigation Center also has a drought impacts reporter. I can't speak to the availability of those data. I quite frankly don't know how available those data are, but you can get to those either by going to droughtmonitor.unl.edu. I think I have that URL correct. Somebody pop it in the chat for me if you know it. Or you can go to drought.gov and get to the drought impacts reporter very quickly from that website as well. And I'm sure that those data are available in some capacity. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Our data go back to July 2017, but again, that's just for Montana.
Thank you, Kyle. So unfortunately, we've got 1 minute left and some questions have come in and we need to wrap up. So what we will do is we will capture those questions from those of you who have not gotten your question answered, and we will reach out to you specifically with those answers. So you won't be left hanging on that. So apologies for that. So very quickly, I just wanted to go through and I apologize, I just lost my, just 1 second, please. Sorry about that. Okay, slideshow, can everyone still see that? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so again, many thanks to Kyle for presenting today. Before we close our webinar, I wanted to say that if you've not already signed up for regional dues or the tribal listserv, please do. These lists will keep you informed on the latest regional drought updates, webinars, meetings, and news. You can sign up using the URL on the screen or by scanning the QR code, or the link can be found in the chat. And so one final reminder, a recording and a webinar recap will be emailed and posted on drought.gov soon. Also, please visit the link that's shown on the screen, scan the QR code, or use the link in the chat to keep up with future drought status updates that may be issued for the Pacific Northwest or the Missouri River Basin regions as conditions evolve. If you have any questions about NIDIS tribal engagement, you can email me or email Jason if you have questions about the Pacific Northwest or Missouri River Basin dues. If you reside in a different region, Jason or I can connect you with drought resources or the drought information coordinator for that region. So the webinar is now concluded. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again in future NIDIS webinars.